All right. That's set up here. Get everything on my screen that I need. Hello, Schreibman family.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Evening, everybody. Okay. In the last few classes, our last 5, 6 classes, we have, and I mentioned this in the message I sent out today, we have explored the history and personalities of 2 main areas. One was Spain, when we talked about the golden age of Spain. And then we shifted into Europe, where we talked about the greater area of Poland, Lesser Poland, Greater Poland, Bohemia, all that area there. And we focused on certain personalities. In the golden age of Spain, we focused on many of the amazing people, both in terms of scholarship, in terms of writing, in terms of basically changing Jewish history in so many ways. And including, we learned about the Tur, we learned about the Shulchan Aruch written by Rabbi Yosef Karo. And when we shifted into Europe and we talked about Poland, we learned about that part of the world in history as well. We talked about the Renaissance and how that had an effect on Jewish life, and brought out scholars such as the Ramah, who wrote his additions to the work of Rabbi Yosef Karo, combining together into the Shulchan Aruch. We're going to switch our perspective tonight, where we're going to be speaking about. And I'm pretty sure that I will be the first and probably the last teaching of a Jewish history class that will start with this kind of a slide. Okay. Oh, come on, there. Earth, Wind, and Fire. I know you all know, at least have heard of the group. I don't actually think I know their music, but I do know of the group. Earth, Wind, and Fire is where we're going to start. And I'll explain that strange introduction the following way. We're going to be talking tonight about Tzfat. In English, it's known as Safed, S-A-F-E-D. It's known as Tzfat, and Tzfat happens to have the distinction of being one of the 4 holy cities of Israel. I'm going to explore that just a little bit because that's not really the topic tonight, but it's good to understand this from the perspective of what we're going to be speaking about. Sorry, I got something in my glasses and I can't see the screen. Let's try that again. Whatever. The 4 cities are Yerushalayim, Hebron, Tzfat, and Tveria. They were the 4 main centers of Jewish life after the Ottoman conquest of what was known then as Palestine, and which does not have any connection to the pretend people who call themselves Palestinians today. Now, what made them or makes them the 4 holy cities? Why is not Ma'ale Adumim one of the 4 holy cities? Or why isn't, I don't know, Cholon? Why not one of those? So we're going to take a look and understand this, because that there are 4 holy cities, and whether you learn Tanya or you learned any other of the philosophical works of, whether it's the Rambam, Bachim, Pakuda, you also know that we refer to the 4 elements, not just earth, wind, and fire, which was the cutesy introduction, but earth, wind, fire, and water. And in Tanya, the Balatanya, the Admar Zaken went through a very long explanation of how these are different types of personalities. That's not what we're going with tonight, but there are 4 holy cities and 4 elements, and surprisingly not, they have a connection. Each of those 4 cities represents one of those elements, and I'll explain how. Yerushalayim is associated with fire because of, not God for the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, but because of the korbanot, the fact that there was a mizbeach that always had a flame of fire going on. Hebron is associated with earth because it is in the earth where in Marat HaMachpelah that the avot and imahot, the forefathers and foremothers, are buried, with the exception, of course, of Rachel, and including Adam and Chava. Tzfat is wind, and that's what we're going to come back to. Wind, in this case, does not mean windy city like Chicago, even though that has nothing to do with wind. It has to do with politics. Wind, in this case, meaning ruach, meaning spirituality, and that's what we're going to be speaking about length tonight. I don't know why I'm using the royal we. I will be speaking about. And the last one's Tveria. The waters of Tveria, not just because of the Kinneret, There are also the Chamet Tveria. The Gemara refers to that many times of the hot springs of Tveria. If you've been to Tveria, you'll know that it is there near the water. There's a number of areas where they have these cone-shaped pieces that protrude from the ground. And you go near them, you can touch them, they're hot. Gemara says that the waters of Tveria get their heat because the water that goes there passes apitra de Gehinom. It goes by the doorway or the entrance to Gehenna. Okay, whatever that means. But in any case, there are natural hot springs there. There's also the Kinneret. So it has the distinction of being the fourth of the holy cities. So what I want to do before we actually get into the topic, I want to just show you two maps. So you'll have some frame of reference and make this a little bigger. Okay. The Ottoman Empire, which I talked about briefly in passing already, but just to understand how massive the empire was, by the 16th century, I'm just going to trace this brown line all the way here, all the way around here, all the way up here. This is all the Ottoman Empire. It was massive. I know that we as Jews tend to think of when the Romans were in charge of Judea, when they're charge of this part of, in Israel, wow, that was like, must have been the biggest thing they had to work that they took care of. When the Jews were in Egypt, man, that was probably the biggest amount of population anywhere in the world. But if you take a look, here's Israel. There's right there, teeny little bit right there. And look at the size of the Ottoman Empire, and yet understand also what the amazing contributions the Ottoman Empire actually did and gave us, including, if you're not aware of this, the wall around the old city is not old at all. It's from the time of Suleiman the Magnificent, who we see over here died in 1566. So it's only about 500 years old, that wall, which in terms of archaeology is relatively young. So again, to understand some of this, I'm going to talk about, it's good to understand this little bit of geography as well. What's also important to know is, let me see if I have it here on the screen. Yeah. Remember over here with Spain and Portugal, they're going to play a part in this in a few minutes. But just keep in mind, here's where Spain, the Spanish Inquisition over here, and the Spanish expulsion of Jews from Spain, then into Portugal and the expulsion from Portugal, and all kind of fun stuff for the Jews. The other map I want to show you, probably are aware of, but I'm still going to put it into context, is because we're going to talk about Tzfat. Make that bigger again. North of Netanya, north of Hadera, north of Haifa, north of Akko, you go just a little bit to the east, and you come to Tzfat, which is right near Nahariya. This is the area we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to talk about some background to the area. We're going to talk about a few personalities that live there and the unbelievable impact they've had ad hayom hazeh to our people. Let me just get one more thing ready here for me. Okay. So we're going to talk about, like I say, we're going to start with Tzfat, just some general background. Around the 16th century, the 1500s, again, we're talking about, Tzfat becomes the most significant spiritual center, I guess would be a good word, for the Jews in Jewish history, especially up until that point, and even ad hayom hazeh. When you talk about where's the spiritual center, it becomes spirituality, and we're going to see, of course, about Kabbalah and all, is Tzfat. I'll tell you a fast story. I was in Israel in, let's see, this is around 1979, I think it was, around 1979. My sister was studying here in Bar Ilan, and she and her friend, a girl that a friend of hers, and we went to Tzfat. And we went to one, at that time, it was not like it looks today. The old cemetery was a little bit more run down. And we went to Tzfat, went to the cemetery, and we were standing, three of us, let's say like right here. There was a guy to our left, and we were talking to him for a second, and we turned back to talk to each other. Then we turned back, and he'd gone. He disappeared. There was like, it wasn't like there was a wall he could have been behind. There was nothing there. So it was creepy. And we kind of looked at each other like, welcome to Tzfat. So interesting things happen in Tzfat. But again, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. Anyways, so again, that part of the world, the Middle East, a lot of Europe, were under the rule of the Turks, of the Ottoman Empire. It became actually a safe haven. And we talked about this when we talked. Now you're going to start to see tonight also how so many things we've learned about start to connect. When the Jews are kicked out of Spain, and then of course out of Portugal, which we really didn't talk much about, the Ottoman Empire becomes a bit of a safe haven for the Jews because they were fairly tolerant of the Jews, and many of them, the Sephardi Jews, find their way to Israel, and many of them up north to the Galil, to the area of Tzfat. And there's like a convergence of multiple things. There's great Torah scholars, poets. Why poets? Because again, if you remember the history we talked about in the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, was the time period of the Ibn Ezra and Yehuda Levi and all these people who had such an impact on the writing, the liturgy of in Judaism. So poets, and then also, and most significantly for our discussion tonight, Kabbalists. The concept of Kabbalah, don't worry, I'm not going to be teaching Kabbalah tonight. I did forget to mention one thing, I apologize. Tonight's learning is in memory of Sherm Fabian, Zichrono Livracha, and for those of you who are aware, Andrea Brownstein's father passed away in his memory as well for Aliyah Nishama. Among the name, we're going to talk about three names tonight. Among the history part, I'm going to mix in three names: the Ramak of Moshe Cordovero, the Arizal, who we'll see who he was if you're not familiar, and also Shlomo Alkabetz, the one who is known probably mostly for having written the Piyut of Lecha Dodi that we sing on Friday night. So first, again, let's put a little bit of historical context to the city of Tzfat. I had occasion to go there a few years ago and spend the day in Tzfat, and it's a magical city. It's unbelievable. So at this time, again, the upheaval of the Jews to the west of the Ottoman Empire, again, in the area of the Iberian Peninsula, Jews getting kicked out, 1492, and then again from Portugal, and then some other places, and before that, of course, England, and some places even after Portugal, and find themselves with a place of refuge under a tolerant Islamic rule. I know that's very hard to put those two words, to use the adjective tolerant and Islamic in the same sentence. In any case, there's a growth in the city of Tzfat because of many different reasons. Number one, it had already, before these scholars get to Tzfat, it already had some kind of a reputation for having a city that had a sense of kedusha, sanctity, connecting to the divine, Hashem, in some special ways, whether it was through learning Torah, whether it was through tefillah, but it already had a reputation. And the Ottoman Empire allowed, to most of the degree, allowed the Jews to have some autonomy. Now, keep in mind, we've talked about this many times, history doesn't happen in just individual pockets. Many things are interconnected in the same time period. If you remember, when we were talking last week and week before about the Vad Abaratzot, the Council of the Four Lands, which is happening in Poland and what we call today modern Poland, for the most part, that the Polish government, again, gave autonomy to the Jews. They were allowed to run their own affairs. They're allowed to make taxation. They're allowed to have a link between the community and the government. So too, this is happening in Tzfat between the Jews that were living there. It's not like today, there were millions of Jews here. There were not, I can't tell you the amount, but it was nowhere near like it is today. And the Jews, and then the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottomans allowed Jewish communities to establish shuls and schools, and probably most significantly, printing presses. Remember, this is the time period, 1500s, of the beginning of printing. By the mid-1500s, there is already a diverse population living in Tzfat, scholars, mystics, artisans, rabbis, laymen. So it's already becoming a thriving, bubbling community. And again, one of the things it didn't have to worry about, as their brothers in Europe had to, in some cases, was a government that was not looking favorably upon them. In this mix comes a man named, by his initials, the Ramak, Resh Mem Kuf, stands for Reb Moshe Cordovero. Probably the most influential figure in the Tzfat's spiritual renaissance. Now, I use that word on purpose because if you remember, Europe, of course, was going through at this time period also a time period of the Renaissance, because that's what gave birth to people eventually like Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Ramah, more and more the Ramah because it's in Europe. So there's a Renaissance going on also in Israel, especially in the area of Tzfat. And in 1522, so basically 500 years ago, this man, the Ramak, comes on the scene. He is known as a prodigious scholar, and one of his, I can't say goals. One of the things he did a lot of was to disseminate Kabbalistic wisdom. Doesn't necessarily mean he was teaching Kabbalah to people as a just wholesale, but the wisdom behind Kabbalah. Now, what does that mean in layman's terms? When we daven, as an example, we daven and we say words. So those words are combined, they have meaning, they go to Hashem, and they do whatever they do. Within Kabbalah, and it comes to tefillah, there are things called kavanot, which mean intentions. That when I say a certain word, I also have in mind a much higher spiritual meaning besides just the word, but something having to do, if you understand what I mean by it, say the spirot, all kinds of interesting things. And this is one of the ideas of many that the Ramak is explaining, teaching, promulgating, and this leaves an indelible mark on the community. Let's talk a little bit about who he was. And once again, as a sign that things connect, his family had originally lived in Spain, and they were kicked out of Spain. And they eventually find their way to Tzfat and settle in Tzfat. So a lot of, and we talked about a story back then about the four scholars, and in other situations where there's a terrible thing that happens, and all of a sudden these scholars end up in different places. It's Kilo Hashem's planting seeds after the Jews are kicked out of some place. There's always growth elsewhere. Jews kicked out of Israel after the first Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, they go to Bavel. Second time they're there again, and they find themselves exploding in scholarship, which gave us the Mishnah eventually in Israel, and the Gemara in Babylonia. So again, the same thing happens here. After the Jews are kicked out of Spain and Portugal and other places, they find themselves in different communities. And in this case, we're talking about Tzfat, and it is Rav Moshe Cordovero, who actually learned part of his time, part of his life, under Rav Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch. In addition to learning along under Rav Yosef Karo, he also learned under Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz is the author of the poem, or the piyut we say on Friday night, Lecha Dodi. Those mentors, both Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz and Rabbi Yosef Karo, they recognized the Ramak's potential, and they nurtured it. They nurtured him being not just a scholar, but someone who was more what we call, for better lack of a better term, a mystic. Now, I want to do is kind of digress for a couple minutes. It's not a digression because it's really part of the topic, but I want to talk about Rav Shlomo Alkabetz and Lecha Dodi for a couple minutes. So he again is in the 1600s. He's from, just to put it in context, he dies at 80 in the year 1580, which is at that time period was pretty old. Today it's not at all, but back then it was pretty old. And he was originally born in Salonika, which is today Thessaloniki, in Greece, which at that time when he was born, at the beginning of the 1500s, remember this, just after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, in Greece, it happened to be a big center of Jews and Torah learning. And not only that, spirituality. This is one of the early days of the growth of mysticism and spirituality and all, is actually in Thessaloniki, if I'm pronouncing that right, Greece. And it also was that his family was more than likely also refugees from Spain. I can't say for sure because it doesn't seem to be anywhere that's clear, but that his family ended up in Greece because they ran there from Spain. So once again, we see that there are people who leave Spain and end up having planted these seeds elsewhere. Rav Shlomo Alkabetz was very, very deeply influenced by mystical traditions of Kabbalah, and he studied under mystics as well. And at some point, I don't know when, he moves to Israel and specifically to Tzfat because where he was growing in his spirituality in Greece, now he's come to Israel. He wants to find a center that already has some form of a reputation of being a center of spirituality. So he, of course, ends up in Tzfat. And when he's there, of course, as I mentioned before, he's there at the same time. Rabbi Yosef Karo ends up there. Rabbi Moshe Cordovero is there. And while he is working on his learning and his growth, he authors the Lecha Dodi. And we're going to see in a minute what propelled him to do that, how it became part of our liturgy. But I do want to point out something, and I pointed this out to people. It's not my chiddush. It's not something I came up with. There's a man in Chicago. His name is Rabbi Brand, and he's been the Rosh Kollel of Kol Talmid Tzion since the early 2000s. And when he came to Chicago, just to show you how he made such an impression personally on me, he came along with a few people came to interview with some of the rabbis in the community and to just kind of get to know them and to see if they would be the one who would become the Rosh Kollel, the new Kollel Talmid Tzion. And he spoke to our group on an evening, and he asked the following question. And I've used this many, many times in different contexts. What's Lecha Dodi about? And we all said it's all about Shabbat. And the answer was yes and no. Because it is about Shabbat when you talk about Lecha Dodi, Likrat Kala, Pnei Shabbat, Kabbalah, right? It's about Shabbat. But once you get past the first couple stanzas, it's not about Shabbat anymore. It's about Beit HaMikdash, it's about Yerushalayim. And why it's not for tonight. But just understand that when you do say or sing Kabbalah, Friday night, Lecha Dodi, it's not only about Shabbat. And I've given shiurim on this before, but maybe for another time I can do it again. In any case, he writes this Lecha Dodi, a mystical, I guess you can call it mystical, what's the word? Hymn. There you go. I didn't ever use that word, Hymn. And it's a lot of it's based on Kabbalistic thought, by the way. Interestingly enough, many people never realize this. They've been singing it their whole lives. There is a way that we identify that he is the author of this, not just because it's come down to us in generation after generation, but because he wove his name into an acrostic or an acrostichon. An acrostic is the initial letter of each stanza, spells his name, Shlomo Halevi. If you are in the middle singing Lecha Dodi and you don't remember where you are, and you remember the last paragraph began with the Lamed, then you know the next one's going to begin with a Mem. So that's an easy way to remember so you don't get lost. Anyways, one of the reasons behind his writing this was to, again, remember, you have to think, in this case, like a mystic. It's someone who's thinking in a spiritual sense. He wants to unite the earthly and the divine. That was his goal with this particular piyut. And because Friday night is the height of spirituality of the week, you finish the 6 days of the week, and now you're beginning of the holiest day of the week. And he felt that this was the right time. And he describes the coming together of the Bnei Yisrael and Hashem like a bride and a groom. That is not a new concept at all. Hashem misinai ba v'zarach v'seir lamo hofia mihar paran v'ata mivot kodesh mimino esh dat lamo. And in the beginning of Zot HaBracha, we see that the Torah describes Hashem as if he were the Chatan coming out to greet his bride, Bnei Yisrael. So the idea of a bride and groom relationship between Hashem and Bnei Yisrael already existed, but he brings this into song and reflects the idea of a union between the Shekhinah and Am Yisrael, which is itself a Kabbalistic idea. His purpose in writing it was not just to write a nice piyut. I mean, I love writing piyutim, and I would love it if people would say them at some point. I would love it if someone made a song out of one of them at least. Bezrat Hashem, hopefully, just as an aside, I'll have a new volume coming out, hopefully beginning of the summer, about 2 or 3 times bigger than any other book so far. Make sure you buy 20 or 30 copies. It's fine. There's no limit. In any case, he had a goal. And his goal was to enhance the spiritual atmosphere of Friday night. Imagine for a moment, imagine a Friday night if you are a shul goer and you walk in a shul and you do Maariv. There's no Lecha Dodi, there's no singing, there's no anything. Very blah, just straight into Maariv. He felt that there was something needed to enhance the spirituality of the moment. is why he suggested the idea of inserting and beginning a focal point of Kabbalat Shabbat of being with the singing of Lecha Dodi, in addition to which kind of framing this as a spiritual celebration of the beginning of Shabbat and the special time between Bnei Yisrael and Hashem. But where does he get the general idea? Now, we know that there's 3 tefillot today. Shacharit in the morning. It's actually technically starts Marv as the first one, but we'll go by order the day with the sunrise. Shacharit in the morning, Mincha in the afternoon, Arvit or Marv at night. Shabbat. We know there's Musaf, which means the additional tefillah, Lehosif, because in the time of Beit HaMikdash, there was an additional korban, an additional sacrifice, and therefore there's a tefillat Musaf. But the idea of Kabbalat Shabbat, where does it even come from? And to be honest, until about the 12th century, which means till about 1,000 years ago, there is no such thing as Kabbalat Shabbat. So where does this come from? I want to talk just a couple of minutes about, I know this is the Tefillah class, but it fits into the whole topic of Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz for us to get to understand a little bit better about the Ramak and then about the Arizal and others. The Gemara tells, not a story, mentions that if I'm not mistaken, I have it written down, I think it was Rabbi Hanina, would go out to the fields on Friday afternoon before sun set, and he would say the following: let us go out and greet the Shabbat queen. I will tell you that Pnei Shuls, Pnei Shul is one of them, when they're about to start Kabbalat Shabbat, will give a little hit on the stender, and the Rav or whoever will say, let us go out and greet the Shabbat queen. What does it mean, Bo v'neitzei? We're sitting in the shul, because at that time, in the time of the Gemara, what Rabbi Hanina, again, if I'm quoting the right source, said, we had to go out literally into the fields, out of our houses. Let's go into the field and let's go out like a greeting the Shabbat queen. In that case, we were the Chatan, we were the bridegroom, and the Shabbat Kala, or Malka, the queen, is going to come and we're going to go greet her in the fields. It is based on that idea that there is a birth and growth of Kabbalat Shabbat. It did not start off as we see it today. In the 12th century, which is the earliest recording of any kind of official, what we call Kabbalat Shabbat, there is in addition to Mariv, there's the addition of Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat and Hashem Melech Geut Lavesh, which are the 2 paragraphs of Tehillim that are said after the Lecha Dodi. That's the first real recognition of anything additional to Mariv, and that's only about 1,000 years ago. Then, in the 16th century, the time of the Arizal, they added Mizmor David, Havul Hashem B'nei Elim. They added that also, because it speaks of the different 7 voices of God. It represents 7 brachot in the Shabbat Shmona Esrei. And at the same time, around the same time, which becomes the hallmark of the pinnacle of Kabbalat Shabbat, is the addition of the Lecha Dodi written by Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. And it's not for another 100 years that the additional other 5 prakim of Tehillim that come before are added by Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, the Ramak, whose name we mentioned. So keep this in mind. I've only talked briefly about each one of these so far. Haven't really mentioned the Arizal except his name. But in building Kabbalat Shabbat, it has an element from the Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, an element from the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, and it has an element from the Arizal in what that was added in different pieces till around the 17th century, the 1600s. We end up having something that we would recognize today as what we would call Kabbalat Shabbat. If you had a Sidur that goes back to the 1500s, which would be worth a lot of money, by the way, you wouldn't find it. Maybe find, if it were early 1500s, you wouldn't find anything at all. And only after that, over the next couple hundred years, is where it starts to grow to what we know. As an aside, there are different customs in different Edot as to how you do Kabbalat Shabbat. And there's also a difference of opinion on what you do with the last paragraph in the Lecha Dodi. Most shuls, the custom, I'm talking now Minhag Ashkenaz, most shuls, the custom is that the last paragraph, they turn around and face the back of the shul, symbolically to welcome the Shabbat Kala, Malka rather, the Shabbat queen, and then welcome the Kala in, or the Malka in. There are those who are against it. I will tell you that I know that in Mitzvah Yericho, I'm sure it's other communities too, but it's the only one I know for a fact, that there's a psak for all the shuls. They're not supposed to turn around. They just stay facing the front of the shul. There's another reason I'll tell you in a minute why we turn around, according to that some turn around. There are others among the Sfaradim that they also don't turn around to the back of the shul. And there are also other shuls like where I daven on Friday night, there's our own. Kabbalat Shabbat starts with the Mizmor the Mizmor just before Lecha Dodi. It doesn't say all the paragraphs added before. That's Minhag Yerushalayim of Adot in the Adot Mizrach. The general belief why people turn around at that last paragraph is again boi chala, right? You're welcoming the queen or the Shabbat queen or bride. But there's another reason. When there is an avel, someone who's in mourning during Shiva in Shul, this would be the first time they're actually able to come into the Shul since the beginning of Shiva, because theoretically they would be davening at home. They've already davened mincha, and now they're going to come in. They don't come in for, depending on the Shul's minhag. I've seen a few different ones. The minhag is that at the end of Kabbalat Shabbat, before Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat, people turn around, face the back, the Avel walks in, and they say, Hamakom Yinachem. So that's another possible historical reason why we face the back of the shul at that time of the end of Kabbalat Shabbat, or at least Lecha Dodi. As a digression for a second, and this falls into the category of something I'm going to talk about another time, which has to do with minhagim, or customs, and minhagei shtut, or foolish customs, or minhagim that are born out of mistakes. Some of you have heard this story from me. True story. I have a friend who, I don't know if he still lives there, but lived in Washington Heights in New York. And when he was growing up, he davened with his father. He davened in Washington Heights. Then he gets older, and he goes out of town for Shabbat, and he's away, and it happens to be during Sfirat HaOmer, and during the middle of the week, and he gets to get ready to daven Marv. They're getting ready to daven to count Sfira, and my friend turned to the back of the shul. And then they counted Sfira, and he asked his friend, like, why are they not facing the back of the shul to count Sfira? So whoever he was with looked at him like he was crazy. He said, what do you mean face the back of the shul to count Sfira? What does that have to do with anything? That's Kabbalat Shabbat. He says, no, in my shul, we face the back of the shul to count Sfira. He says, what are you talking about? So he figured he'll go back, he'll find out from his father what's the story. So one thing leads to another. He finds out the following story. Now, in Washington Heights, many, many people of the older generation were, especially the Breuers community, were from Germany. And many happen to have come from a specific shul in Germany, where in that shul, the Hinanim Muchanim Zimam, little paragraph that some people say before counting Sfira, was written on a very large poster in the back of the shul. So what happened was the people would turn around, face that to read it on the back wall, and then they would face the front of the shul to count. So the little kids grew up thinking you face the back of the shul to say that, and you count facing the front of the shul. Now, it is foolish, okay? That's how certain minhagim are born, out of foolishness, but it has halachic ramifications in many things. And I'll give you just one example where you can by accident teach your children something wrong. When it became popular in many places outside of Israel, I haven't seen it in Israel, but outside of Israel, to put mosquito netting on top of a sukkah, the question was to put this netting under the schach and the schach on top of it, or the netting on top of the schach, and with the proper spacing, so the schach's not laying on something that's synthetic. And the decision was that this mosquito netting could be put there, but it had to be on top of the schach. And the main reason given was that children shouldn't grow up thinking that was the schach, that the mosquito netting is what they have to do. So when they get older, they'll make use of the mosquito netting. So as they say, the kids say, it's a thing. But that's an interesting little perspective on how foolish or mistaken minhagim are born. Anyways, how is it that Lecha Dodi became so popular? In every nusach, in Ashkenaz, in Nusach Sfarad, in Adot Mizrach, Nusach Ari, Italia, they all have Lecha Dodi in Kabbalat Shabbat. How did it become so popular? So number one is the Kabbalistic influence. Remember, it starts off in Tzfat, and it's really the Ari Zal, who we have yet to speak about, but I'm sure some of you are familiar with his name. It kind of makes it one of his agendas. I'm using that. He didn't say it like that, but I am to spread this idea of spirituality. And because the Ari said it, and it took off like wildfire. Another is it had a very important theme that really fits in with us, with our liturgy, and that's looking at Shabbat as a kala, as a bride, and also because I mentioned before that it's not only about Shabbat, but it's about Beit HaMikdash and Yerushalayim. The idea of redemption also resonated with people. And besides, the other one of more of a technical issue was the way it was written, again, in piyut form. In English, that's called liturgical poetry. It was very easy to come up with various music for which it would be sung by. The first time I was in Tzfat as an adult, I guess like after I was married and I was coming with groups, bring groups to Israel, I went to Tzfat, and we were in the shul, in the Ari shul, and then we stood out in the courtyard of the shul right near where Shlomo Alkabetz used to be, and we sang Lecha Dodi. I'm sure it happens every single day in Tzfat, and I'm sure that people who live there are like tired of hearing it, but it was actually very interesting, very moving to sing it where the piyut was born and know that it was right there. So that's pretty amazing. The Ramak, now I'm going to go back now to Rav Moshe Cordovero, who's a student of Shlomo Alkabetz, a student, and others, and Rav Yosef Karo, was sparked. His Kabbalistic interest and beliefs and growth were sparked by Shlomo Alkabetz. And Shlomo Alkabetz is the one who introduced him to the Zohar. The Zohar, of course, being the main text of Kabbalah. When it was authored, it's subject to different opinions. I am not a scholar enough to tell you who is correct. Some attribute to Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, others to much later. But he began to delve, Ramak began to delve into what are called the secrets of Kabbalah, the esoteric aspect of Kabbalah. He wrote, his main book that he wrote was called Pardes Rimonim. It means in English, the orchard of the pomegranates. And it was a systematic presentation of Kabbalistic thought, clear, organized, not some just pie in the sky, but I've never learned it, but I'm aware of it, that it has mystical teachings and provides a framework for someone to be able to learn the Zohar and be able to understand more. His work was considered groundbreaking because he took abstract ideas and he made them accessible to a wider audience. And he does, I have written down, let's take a look, what is it? With my nose a second. So the topics that he dealt with in general, nature of God, okay, easy peasy. The structure of the spiritual realms, what does that mean? So again, if you've learned Tanya, you'll know that we talked about that in Tanya, the idea of the different levels of Shemayim, that there, for one part we didn't get to when we were learning it, where it says there's 500 years distance from one level to another. What does that even mean? Again, in parentheses, if you are familiar with the expression to be in seventh heaven, it comes from Judaism. We believe there are 7 levels of heaven, the highest being where the Kisei HaKavod is. It's also one of the reasons, one of the other reasons why a bride goes around the Chatan 7 times to represent that highest level of Kedusha. So it's all kinds of things, and he discusses those ideas in Pardes Rimonim, and also the different, again, if you don't know what this means, that's fine, the interaction between the different sfirot, or the divine emanations of God, and how that works. Again, all just easy stuff. You can just kind of, you need like Zohar for dummies. I don't know. And one of the things he does try to really bring home is the interconnectedness between Hashem and everything in creation. to that end, let's see if I have a link here. Just a minute. Where did I put it? Hold on 1 second. Give me 1 minute because I want to find something that I want to show you. I think I have it on a different screen. Let me see if this is here. Oh, no. I don't see it so fast. Oh. Yeah, okay. Let me get the link. I'm pretty sure this is it. Control click. Let's see if I found it. Give me 1 second to get it set up and then I'll do a screen share. Okay. Oh no, this isn't it. Okay, I have to go find it because I don't think I had it here in my notes. I want to show you a video. Time is already getting late, but I'm just seeing if I have it here somewhere. Oh, I think I found it. Yes, I did. Okay, let me do a screen share here. This is 2.5 minutes long. I need to explain to you what this is and set it up, and then I'll be able to show it to you. I need to share with sound. Share with sound. Yes. Okay. Some of you may be familiar with something called the Fibonacci sequence. He's going to explain to you what this is. When we talk about the interconnectedness of Hashem in everything, this is just the interconnectedness of Hashem in nature. Again, Hashem is nature, but I want to show this to you because it's absolutely fascinating. And this is like, I can't tell you that it says this in the Zohar. I can't tell you it says this in Pardes Rimonim, but I guarantee you the Ramak knew this. Let's take a look at this.
The sequence begins with the numbers 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and continues indefinitely. Each number is obtained by adding the last 2 digits together. If we were to take a perfect or golden rectangle, break it down into smaller squares based on Fibonacci's sequence, and divide each with an arc, the patterns begin to take shape. We begin to see Fibonacci's spiral. The spiral in and of itself is insignificant. Its importance is revealed in where we find it. Take, for example, the sunflower. The display of its florets are in perfect spirals of 55, 34, and 21, the sequence of Fibonacci. The fruitlets of the pineapple create the same spiral based on the sequence. The pine cone does the same. As currents move through the ocean and the tide rolls onto the shore, the waves that bring in the tide curve into a spiral that can be mathematically diagrammed onto a plot at the points 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and 55. Buds on trees, sand dollars, starfish, petals on flowers, and especially the nautilus shell are formed with this exact same blueprint. With each segment of growth, the nautilus adds to itself one more value on Fibonacci's scale. This blueprint can be seen around us on a small scale every day, but the greatest example of all is directly above our heads. At an average of 100,000 light years across, even the spiral of the galaxies above us are formed with the exact design that the tiny shell is formed. This sequence or blueprint appears to be the trademark of a designer.
Okay. I like how he has it. Appears to be the blueprint of a designer, i.e. God. Again, this is something that it's worth its own sheer. The Fibonacci sequence seen in nature, it is everywhere. Take a look at a leaf next time you're outside. Just take a leaf at a tree, look at the back, look at the veins, look at the numbers, look at everything. It is absolutely mind-boggling how the Fibonacci sequence works into everything in nature. 0, 1, and add the last 2, you get 1. 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, and so on. And that's how it appears. That's Hashem's blueprint, so to speak, or thumbprint, as it were, fingerprint in nature. It's truly unbelievable. And that's the kind of thing that the Ramak brings across in his book, Pardes 3:1. Okay, we're going to stop here. Pick it up next week. We'll talk a little bit more about the Ramak, and then we're going to talk about the Arizal and a little Kabbalah. Hope you have a good evening. Hope you enjoyed, and see you Bezrat Hashem next week.
Thank you. Super interesting.